Hi, everyone, and welcome to this conversation facilitated by the International Parliamentary Network for Education. IPNEd's delighted to be supporting efforts both in advance of and at the Global Education Summit in London. When IPNEd was established last year, our parliamentarians from all around the world committed to doing everything they can to accelerate progress towards Sustainable Development Goal 4, the promise of quality education for the world's children. But they also indicated that in addition to that general commitment, there needed to be three priority issues, which were really at the heart of progress. The first of which is obviously very much related to the proceedings this week at the summit, was that of financing. And we have, in fact, had a conversation about the financing issue with colleagues from the Zimbabwe Parliament and the German Bundestag. The other issue was learning outcomes and the fact that lots of children attend school but don't learn enough, or including, critically, learning how to read and write and basic skills. And then the final priority which our members articulated was that of inclusion and equity, knowing that actually the benefits of education are not universally shared in an equal manner, and that there are many children who've been left behind and are continue to not benefit from access to education. So with that in mind, the conversation today is going to focus a little bit on that third dimension of our work, equity and inclusion. And for that conversation, I'm really excited to be joined by two of IPNEd's founding members, parliamentarians, Senator Fiona Lagan from Ireland and Aroma Dutta from Bangladesh. You'll learn a little bit more about them in a moment, but I know a little bit of their CVs and their previous engagement, and I'm incredibly excited and confident that they're going to have a lot to say, drawing on their work before they entered Parliament and in Parliament, about advancing equity and inclusion and closing the gaps in progress and access for lots of groups that are still, sadly, currently left behind. So without further ado, I'm actually going to start by asking each of them to introduce themselves.
My name is Fiona Lagan, and before I entered Parliament in 2016, I, maybe you could say, had a variety of different experiences in the working world. As the eldest of 11 children, I was always very interested in working with young people and working with community. And I was a primary school teacher for a number of years. I taught in a disadvantaged area. So I became very conscious of the socioeconomic disparities between families and between communities, and how important the education system was. How important that the education system was to try to level the playing field, so to speak. While I was teaching in primary school, I also had the opportunity to teach children with special needs. And as I have a brother with Down syndrome myself, I always had a particular interest in this area. So when there was an opportunity for Ireland to host the Special Olympic World Games in 2003, and Ireland won that bid. In fact, we became the very first country outside of America to host the Games. I was immediately interested in learning how we could celebrate children and young people with special needs. And I became involved in that. I became involved in the educational and community aspect by helping set up host town programs around the island of Ireland. So that was where a community or a town would come together, learn about the culture of another country coming to them, but also learn about the important attributes that people with intellectual disabilities have. I also, at the same time, got involved in local government because I could see the importance of local as well as national government in terms of defining goals for the community, and also ensuring, again, that there was an inclusive community that was open to diversity and welcoming of it.
Wow, that's a really interesting kind of route into this issue of equity and inclusion. And then what about your current role in Parliament? Where do you sit and who do you represent?
I'm a member of the Fianna Fáil party, which is the main party in government at the moment. I was elected to National Parliament in 2016 and unfortunately failed to keep my seat by 150 votes last year, but I was lucky enough then to go and appeal to a different electorate and was elected to the upper house. So I'm a spokesperson for education for my party within the Senate, which is the upper house. I'm also deputy chair of the all-party Education Committee. I was chair of that when I was in the Dáil, and we have the opportunity not just to discuss legislation, but also to agree work agendas and to prioritise different areas. For example, at the moment we're looking at the whole school bullying area, which obviously is very important in the area of equality. Also, I'm also the head of the Irish delegation to the Council of Europe, which of course is very interesting, and we're dealing with a lot of the whole area of human rights and of social justice. And I find with the work that I do, both through education, I sit on the Disability Committee, and of course, in terms of the constituency work that I take on, that I am dealing with a lot of the areas of equality, inequality, and social justice.
Amazing. Well, we look forward to hearing more about that and what that looks like in a second. But lots of interesting things both before and now during Parliament that we can draw on for this conversation. Aroma, I'm going to turn now to you. Hopefully you can hear me. I just wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit about your experience and what led you to this work on inclusion and, of course, your current role in Parliament.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Basically, I was an activist within the civil society, and I had been a very crucial element for developing a platform for policy on education, because we found that the education system in Bangladesh does not address much for the marginalized people, particularly for the most disadvantaged groups, which includes minorities, disabled, and all other categories of people who are being deprived of this system. So as a development worker and a practitioner, so I thought that there must be some kind of a initiative to be taken, and which I did, which was a big challenge for me, very, very serious challenge, because in Bangladesh, you know that it is the NGOs actually run the show within the government and along with the government structure. But then there are no kind of bridge between the government and the NGOs, the civil society. So what I thought that it cannot move in two different directions. It has to move in one direction by complementing and supplementing each other's role. So that is one of my passions, which led me to work on this particular issue. And I had been quite instrumental, so that now I am the one of the founding member of CAMPE, which includes 900 NGOs who are deeply working in the education sector, and actually what I call like they work like watchdogs also. They also work like watchdogs with the government, and now there had been a lot of tension between the government and the NGOs on this issue, particularly on the financing issues. Because you know that financing is a big challenge. So now the government has come to an agreement. They are providing support to large number of NGOs for their educational program. They're supporting, and so that they can ensure quality. This is where I'm coming to. And so that we can actually address on the issue of equity, unless, because the government has the finance and the NGOs have the capacities. So by combining both of these two elements, we can, we have achieved a lot. Considering all our backdrops and all kind of challenges which exist in Bangladesh. There are severe challenges which we had overcome. Now you can see that if you go in the remotest remote place in Bangladesh, in the villages, you will see young girls and young boys are running to school. So now it has become one of the part of their lives. So that had given me the more what my commitment to ensure that we have to ensure that we can reduce the gender gap. Also, this is very important, that if we do not bring women into the educational, institutionalize them into coming into the sector, we can talk about gender discrimination all and on and blah blah blah. But if you want to make a balance, gender balance, and reduce gender gap, I think it was absolutely necessary for girls to come and have access to education. So that's where I am coming from, and
Great.
that's where I did work.
Amazing. So I'll come back to you about that, and we'll talk a little bit more about how to close the gender gap in education and what you're doing in Bangladesh in respect of that. And let me go back to Fiona, Senator O'Loughlin. Before we talk more about equity in Ireland in respect of education, Fiona, can you give us a bit of paint a bit of a picture of some of the historic and contemporary examples of exclusion that you and others have worked on in Ireland?
Absolutely, Joseph. And I suppose three areas would spring to mind in particular. One would be around the whole LGBT community. It's sad to say that it's only 28 years since homosexuality has been decriminalised in Ireland. And that's such a short period of time. And then in 2014, yes, equality. We had a big campaign to change our constitution so that people within the LGBT community could have a lawful and legal marriage. We still have quite a way to go, but I think that's one particular area of exclusion within society. We also would, I think, in the whole area of special education, now we've made very strong progress, really, particularly maybe, in the last 10 or 15 years. But when we look back to 25 or 30 years ago, we had very little mainstream education for children with special needs. And really, it's so important that children with special needs have the opportunity to learn in a local community setting with siblings, with neighbours, and with their community. So we've made quite strong advances in that area, and many of our schools, but not enough, have a particular what we call ASD classes, and that's those on the autistic spectrum disorder, that they would have particular classes, but also within the mainstream classes. So we introduced an SNA system, their special needs assistance, and we have a very that has, I think in the last 10 years, we have about 70% more than we had at that point in time. We've also 40% more special needs teachers. So I think that we are advancing. Early intervention is absolutely crucial and hugely important. Ireland has, unfortunately, one of the lowest levels of employment for people with disability. And that's something, again, that we have to work on. And we can only work on that through the proper education system. The third area that I might mention is around the whole traveller, the Irish traveller, and the Roma area. And again, education is absolutely key. We know that about 16.6% of female traveller women only get to complete secondary school education, and 6 out of 10 traveller men actually leave at the end of primary school. So we have worked on having a number of strategies put in place, and there's 5 pilot schemes ongoing at the moment. Government has just passed a bill in relation to recognising Irish traveller heritage and culture within our whole curriculum system. And I think that's where we need to go, because the whole area of diversity and inclusivity is hugely, hugely important. But again, I go back to the point that education is crucial to changing perceptions, changing attitudes, and for those who wish to have the opportunity to fulfill their own potential.
Amazing, great. And 3 really fascinating and quite different examples of communities that might be excluded, but also 3 kind of different legislative approaches. So constitutional change, obviously funding and programming on the disability inclusion front, and then on the third front, you were talking about the recognition of culture as being a prerequisite for people feeling comfortable and included in education.
Absolutely.
So, Aroma, can I come to you? You are no stranger to fights for minority rights and on inclusion. And although you spoke specifically in your introduction about the importance of gender and gender equity in education, I know that you've also been a strong voice for minority rights and the rule of law and non-discrimination in Bangladesh for other minority groups. So maybe could you, in the same way that Fiona did, just give us a bit of a snapshot of some of the key forms of exclusion that operate in Bangladesh, both in respect of education, but more generally?
The issue on this minority on education has been a big kind of a debate and an issue, which has been an ongoing process, especially because they are very marginalized and they are based in different pockets of Bangladesh. Some very particular pockets, which are, most of those pockets are inaccessible. One. Second, that we have been we have been trying to get to the government and the NGOs that they need special care, because they are the group of special needs. And within the minority communities, they have less options for job market. And because as they have less options for job markets, and they feel more kind of insecure in the sense that they do not have any space in the policy making, neither in the government nor in the NGOs nor anywhere, because they are like silent, how would I say, silent spectators, and they are trying now to come out of that kind of situation. Now we are trying to promote them to have access to like the policy making platform so that they can raise their own issues. And this is something which we have been trying, and we found that with this kind of problem in Bangladesh, the women, particularly women in the from the minority communities, are not taking the challenge. The parents do not feel very comfortable to, provide them with higher education, and they go for early marriage, which is a very serious problem in Bangladesh. And this is what it is, that like with the Education Watch study, we have done an Education Watch study, shows that 31% of learners have access to also distance learning modalities, because they do not have the distance learning modalities either, because they cannot go to schools and they cannot have access to distance learning, which indicates that most marginalized and really minorities are at risk being pushed out from the education. And especially due to the economic and social and cultural factors, they enter into child labor, they get engaged in household activities and become big victims of child marriage. And this is particularly for the girls. And we do not have any particular data. And this is something we are now trying, so that we have disaggregated data so that we can ask the government, our Bangladesh government, who is also very keen now, very, very, very keen. This present government is very keen to provide and promote education for all. This is something we would like, the education for all. So they are not marginalized, no, so they are not left out. So this situation has like given the spirit, given the strength to now for those community to come forward. So this is something which you are, and to build forward better and significant investment, which is required absolutely without support from the government, from the policymakers, from the NGOs, that it is not possible for us to minimize the gender gap, because it is an ongoing process. And this is how we would like to bring, the other players and actors to minimize the gender gap. And also we'd like that we would like to have like more financing is required, because it is like one size fits all. I think this policy has to be, reworked, that one size does not fit all, because it has special needs in different areas, and especially for those minority groups, and especially for women to come to an equitable position. Thank you.
Yeah. Fiona, it sounds like from what you had said that Ireland has really recognised that a one-size-fits-all approach, as Aroma said, doesn't work, and that you need to undertake special measures to include certain populations, or to amend the offer to make sure that they feel as though they're being represented. Is that true, and is that your kind of experience of this process of inclusion?
Exactly.
Absolutely. And that's why we have introduced a program delivering educational opportunities to schools that goes to particular areas of socioeconomic disadvantage. And there are even different streams. There's 4 different streams within that. And that's about delivering both extra funding, lowering the pupil-teacher ratio, providing hot meals on campus, and also providing extra emotional supports for those children, providing homework clubs, for example. And there are particular strands. One that I think is of particular importance, well, 2 maybe I'd mention, is the school completion program. And that's where children that are identified at risk of leaving school early, that there's a special program put in place to try to keep them within education. And the other is the homeschool liaison program. And that's where there is a teacher appointed from within the staff situation to liaise with the families, to liaise then with other stakeholders, so social workers, etc. And that has been an incredible success. I wish that was in every single school, but unfortunately it's not. Just one other point I'd like to make, and it was interesting listening to Aroma talking about that intergenerational change that we need, where parents are not sure about the benefits of sending their daughters on to higher education. We have, and I didn't mention this earlier, but we've a particular migrant strategy as well, because over the last maybe 20 years, we've had a lot of migrants coming into Ireland. So there's a language barrier and a culture barrier there. Friends of mine that are still teaching would talk about having a school situation where they may have 26 different languages. And so these children are coming to school where English is not their first language. So we have different strategies put in place to support migrants also. So I completely agree with Aroma that one size does not fit all. And I agree with what you said, Joseph, is that we need to have a multitude of different strategies to be able to deal with different situations within different schools.
Fantastic. Really clear messaging there. I think what's fascinating about this conversation, if I may too, is we often think about the equity dimension particularly referring to low-income countries, low and middle-income countries, recognising that there are often big equity gaps. But the conversation we've had with you today, Fiona, really illustrates that equity is a universal concern for education systems. It just looks different in different places. And you've provided really compelling examples of some of the challenges in Ireland, but really interesting as well, some of the solutions. Aroma, I wanted to actually ask you, Fiona mentioned language diversity, and certainly in Bangladesh, the minority groups sometimes speak different languages. I wondered how the government is approaching that issue, which I think is more and more recognised as a barrier to children's learning, the fact that they might turn up at school and not be taught in the language which they speak at home.
Interesting. Yes. This is another big challenge in Bangladesh because Bangladesh is quite diverse, considering the situation that there are many other languages which are spoken by different communities, particularly with the what you call indigenous minority communities, and especially in the hills. And also in the plainlands, there are different categories of, we call indigenous minorities. They have their own language. And this is a demand which is coming, that they would like to have their curricula within their own language. But with the hill tracts, in Chittagong hill tracts, Bangladesh government has introduced a curricula with their language. But with the plainland indigenous minority communities, they could not, because there are so many dialects. So it is not easy. So that is the reason why they could not, even considering the reality, they could not. But in the hill tracts, there is not only 2 or 3 dialects, so they could manage with that. So this has been addressed by the Bangladesh government very much, so that they could come to a level where we are talking about justice.
Yes.
Justice, and this is an issue of justice and equity. And because all the time we are talking, not only talking, we have been demanding that how we bring them at a level where they can compete along with the mainstream communities. This is what I like, what my friend just mentioned, that you have to bring them in the mainstream. You have to involve them in the mainstream if you want to, make them a national asset, and so that they can contribute in the GDP, and also they can improve their socio-economic and political condition, because they're the one who are being still living in different pockets, facing various challenges which cannot be managed in one formula, because there are so many formulas and it is not possible at the moment. Though UNESCO has been helping us with that, and Bangladesh government has taken that challenge and trying to provide that support. Thank you.
So one of the things, of course, that IPNEd attempts to do is to really leverage the role of parliamentarians in these issues, really focusing on the specific functions of parliamentarians, which, as you know, includes representation, advocacy, legislation, budgeting, and of course, providing scrutiny or monitoring what government does. If, Fiona, you look at your role as a parliamentarian and think about where progress has been made, if you had to choose one of the functions of being a parliamentarian that you feel has been most critical or has been most effective in moving the needle in the direction that you desire, what would it be? Would it have been the representative role, speaking up in Parliament, legislating, budgeting? They're all mutually inclusive and supportive, but I'm interested to know if you've got any insights about what you think really does make the difference from your role as an MP.
I think they're all extremely important and one can't exist without the other. But I think that probably the one that is most important is the whole area of advocacy. And I think, listening to lived experience and being able to express that, be it on the chamber floor or within committee, or in terms of developing policy. And I might give you just one very small example, which again links back to what Aroma was talking about. In Ireland, we're the first parliament in the world to actually bring in an internship program for people with special needs. And I was the initiator of that. And again, that brings us back to education and to that link between those that are not able to access employment, and then just really going down the poverty road. And essentially what we did is we worked with 2 service providers, and we organized a year-long program, and we called it, you know, a leadership program. And 50% of those young people actually went on to get permanent jobs. These were all people with disabilities. So by listening and understanding and advocating for that, I was able to put that into practice. A budget was put into place, and that really is the Parliament showing example to other workplaces and to other parliaments indeed around the world. So yes, I think that advocacy piece is the most important.
Great, fantastic. Very compelling example of the importance of advocacy, but also a fascinating example of what a parliament itself can do, rather than kind of just asking others to do. Fiona, I think we might invite you to write about that internship program so that we can publish something on the IPNEd website, because that feels like something that parliamentarians might want to learn more about. Aroma, same question to you. If you think about your role as a parliamentarian, what's the function that you think has made the biggest difference to your work for inclusion in education?
I am totally in agreement with Fiona, my friend, because as a parliamentarian, 2 roles I play. One for advocating and one to work on as a pressure group. And third, and to intervene in the policy. So this is very critical that I, as a parliamentarian, have I wear like 3 hats, so that I can be more instrumental, because as I have varied experiences coming from the civil society organizations, so that I know the external world, what they are doing and how they do advocacy. And when I'm in the parliament, I consider myself that I am also an ambassador on behalf of the civil society and the people, and also as parliamentarian, that I do the same way, that you can put more what you call my inputs into the policy level. And I have to admit very proudly that our current Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina is very supportive, very, very supportive of, education, particularly for girls' education. And she has also opened up institutions for disabled children. We have large number of now, institutions for disabled children to have access to education. And I think this is quite remarkable. And this is a new dimension which has taken place over last 10 years. So you can see that they are now becoming visible, and more program has been promoted with fiscal support. So as a parliamentarian, this is what I do. And also I do that as a standing committee. We also scrutinize the annual performance, how it looks like. And I also I also sit and I try to provide legislative support for enhancing National Education Act, because these are major instruments. Great. Otherwise, and I try to bring in my fellow parliamentarians to be more vocal and understand the need, so that our voices are being heard.
Great. Lots of work that you're doing, keeping busy across all of those various functions in the Bangladesh Parliament. So This has been a fantastic conversation. It's really whet my appetite to learn more about what's happening in both Bangladesh and Ireland. And I hope that it has done the same thing for our viewers. One of the things that IPNEd wants to do is it wants to shine a light on the excellent work that parliamentarians are doing and provide them with a platform. And I think we've done that today, hearing from both of you. And I acknowledge and appreciate your work, but also the time that you've spent in telling us a little bit about it today. Another thing that we attempt to do as IPNEd is bring parliamentarians together across party in parliaments to make common cause, but also regionally and, like today, globally. And I think we've really achieved that in really having you both tell the stories and provide examples of your work in two very different contexts. But what I'm always and often surprised by is the parallels. We talked today about the fact that equity is a universal concern and that we need to move forward to inclusive educational systems everywhere in the world. And there were numerous other parallels that both of you drew out, which I think I'm looking forward to exploring further, both with you and with other parliamentarians. We wanted to keep this relatively short to make it a bit of a taster for people and to give them a bit of an insight into what parliamentarians are doing and how IPNEd is working to amplify and support them. So I'm going to close today's conversation here. Thank you both very much for participating. And I know that as founding members of IPNEd, as committed education advocates and parliamentarians, we're going to continue our conversations with you and try to support your good work going forward. So thank you and go well.
Thank you so
Thank you, Joseph.
much.
It was an absolute pleasure and lovely to engage with Aroma as well.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you.